Welcome to the Q Show, the Quinnipiac Chamber's news program about legislative and policy updates. I'm Dee Pryor-Nesty, the Executive Director at the Quinnipiac Chamber. Here with us is State Representative Craig Fishbein, representing Cheshire and Wallingford. Joining us for insight are Chris Porter, Chairman of the Quinnipiac Chamber's Governmental Affairs Committee and President of Porter Financial Strategies, and Christine Mansfield, serving on our Governmental Affairs Committee as well, and CEO of Discovery Training Services. Welcome to the Q Show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you for having me.
Craig, let's just start off. What committees are you on for this session?
I'm on Public Safety, Commerce, and Energy and Technology.
And what do those commissions do?
Well, Commerce has cognizance over DECD, which is the Department of Economic Development for the state. We talk about tax incentive programs for various select groups around the state, most of which I vote against, quite frankly. Public Safety has cognizance over the state police, the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection. We've spent a lot of time this session dealing with casinos and crumbling foundations.
Oh, sure.
And then Energy and Technology is all over the place. You know, cell towers, nuclear, natural gas, electric, even water, which is an energy or technology, although used for hydro. And that has cognizance over DEEP and Pura, and there's one other group like that.
And now we know, we're from Wallingford, so we know when you were a town councilman, you're very hands-on, and we hear that as a legislator you are as well. What top bills are you passionate about? What do you want to get passed this year?
Well, I've been focused on oversight to begin with. You know, my perception going to Hartford has been that everybody wants to be Santa Claus, you know, so, you know, giving out the taxpayer dollars, and then there's no follow-through on is there a benefit. So, you know, one of the things that I proposed is there's a group, it's a quasi-public agency, it's called Connecticut Innovations, and I started to investigate some of their grants and who they were giving them to and what is the follow-through. And I've been doing FOI requests with regard to that, and I'm finding some very troubling things. And I actually proposed a bill so that the legislature would have statutory control over how they give out money. Because there is no statutory, there's nothing created by statute saying this is how Connecticut Innovations gives the money, this is the purpose or anything like that. Unfortunately, that bill didn't make it through committee. You know, everybody wants to be Santa Claus, but they don't want the follow-through. You know, so that's one of the areas. And I just, you know, just to talk about that for a moment, one of the grants that I looked into is for $150,000, and it's to two juniors in college. And right in the application, it says that it is not their intent to bring any jobs to Connecticut, but to build technology for this particular program and then to sell it. That's what your tax dollars are going for. There's no security for that funding. You know, they didn't secure a home or a property. They were just given a check. There was two checks, one of which on the document it says $75,000 will be used for, and it's blank. And we're
That
creating the
doesn't
documents. No, so you know that's just one example, and you know that's what I tend to look into is oversight. Another area is we voted on the very first time in session, voting on union contracts and agreements. Once again, an oversight. You know, the oversight by the legislature. The governor's office negotiates these things, but the legislature never sees them. And unfortunately, along political lines, that vote was defeated. You know, but I know that's going to come up again, and I've co-sponsored some bills in that regard. And then generally a lot of things having to do with the economy. I've been championing, talking about, co-sponsoring, and or introducing.
That's great. You are very fiscally responsible. We know you're known for that. So
Thank you.
Christine, do you have a question for?
Yeah, I mean, we've been looking at some of the bills, and certainly what's very familiar to Wallingford is our town reserves. We have a number of restrictions on the monies that the town and the taxpayers have invested. And going forward, you've proposed a bill that's rather fascinating, looking at giving some protection to up to 15%. I think you might have co-authored this bill. But when you have money, and just to explain it to the taxpayers, when we have money sitting in our bank accounts, we pay our bills. And then we have some bills that we've promised to pay, right? It might be a mortgage. You might have put some money aside for vacation funds, but it's allocated, right? We don't want to take that and spend it on another bill that comes up. And one of the bills that often comes up for review, whether on town council or wearing that hat, is contracts, right? A union comes forward, they say, I want X percentage, I want these benefits this year. Comes to the town for a review or a vote, and the town has to vote on it. And if the council doesn't agree on the terms, it goes to arbitration. So we have a state panel, third party, that gets to look at these contracts, look at the money, say you want this and I want that, and I get to make a decision. And it's state law. Whatever they say is binding. So the towns, the taxpayers, you and I, would inherit any increases. If they want more money, if they want more benefits that cost more, and we didn't anticipate it, we have to live with it. So you've proposed something, because when the state gets to look at that, the panel says every dollar counts, whether you've earmarked it or not. So you're saying, wait, time out, up to 15% should be reserved. You shouldn't look at that, because technically that's not available for something extra. And so from our perspective, that's really sound fiscal management policy. So we applaud those efforts, because we would say protect that, because some of that's being used to give us AAA bond rating. It's protecting our investment that our policy making has done to our credit, good credit fiscally. So help us understand that. Let's understand some of that philosophy that you put into to protect some of that, and say, let's look at what's left over after we've made our promises. Help us understand that liability.
Well, it's part of projecting. I mean, we're generally the same age, and I think when we left the nest, the rule was that when you're going to get a rent, you should be looking at your income should be about your monthly income divided by the weeks. There's a component there. So you plan and you set money aside, and as you go forward, you have something you can fall back on. I think fundamentally all towns should have a certain cushion that if something bad happens, or the arbitration situation, they don't have to go to the taxpayer. That the funding is there. That's just fiscal prudence, and just to deal with So this particular bill takes 15% of what the town has in reserves and just sets it aside. It can't be considered as the ability to pay part of the statute in arbitration. But at the other end, I've proposed a bill that gross wage increases ordered by arbitrators can't be more than 0.03% of COLA increases. Because part of the problem is that we're seeing 2.5% increases. You've got people on fixed incomes that aren't getting increases. So you're automatically saying to them, you're getting less money or the same money on an annual basis, but you're going to pay the government more. So therefore, we're really whacking those people. So if the federal government says, this is a COLA increase, I think the arbitration and the wage increases should be tied to that as well.
And I think that's important when we look at our labor agreements, that we have some correlation to the ability to pay. Because you can misleadingly look at a reserve. As an example, the town of Wallingford has restricted accounts. And again, for liabilities, we've got debts to pay, we have AAA bond ratings. What's left over, that's truly an ability to pay something that's extra. And so I think your bill starts to point to the town's true assessment of liquid accounts or expendable accounts that you could pay something extra for. So we applaud that. And again, riding on that coattails, we're going to turn to Chris for another question on fiscal responsibility and another bill that I think you're co-authoring, you've been very busy on. and looking at some of the spending caps.
Yeah, so I'm gonna pivot it slightly. You know, one of the things that we were talking about earlier is, and you kind of alluded to it, is up in Hartford, there's a lot of spending. Okay, and people like to play Santa Claus and all of that. From my perspective, I think a business perspective is it's not, the issues aren't spending, or maybe it is. The issues are not having the money to do so, and then when you need it, you come to the taxpayers for more. When I say you, I mean the body as a whole. And, you know, quite frankly, we're tapped out. Okay, and we think that, you know, so maybe it's a spending on the legislature's part.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, so maybe cuts would be in line? Where might that start?
That's a really tough question. You know, everybody is looking for the same, if not more, funding. You know, part of the problem is time and time again, the legislature says we're going to create a lockbox. You know, we're gonna collect revenue. It's going to be used for this, but then the money gets swept into the general fund. We're you know, continually coming up with new programs. You know, generally alluded to the tax incentive programs that I voted against. Well, when you say to you know, one of the bills that was just passed out of Commerce took manufacturing, small manufacturing in the New London area, and gave tax incentive for that. So when you're carving out that select group of people and saying to them you're going to pay less taxes, well, that means you and I are going to pay more taxes. That doesn't work. So because then you're dealing with perception, making the problem worse. I don't know where to cut at this point.
That's fair. I mean, you've just gone up to Hartford, so you know you could.
But we
get
talk
a little under your belt.
talk about the budget and the economy almost every day in some aspect, and I don't have. I mean, the governor's budget that he came out with is a non-starter. It you know, with all due respect, I think it was irresponsible because it just wasn't going anywhere to begin with. It wasn't something that the legislature could possibly work with and to build upon. So, you know, April 27th, appropriations will be voting on their recommendations, and that'll be a work in progress. And then we're going to spend, you know, the month of May hashing out what's going to happen. But, you know, I think there has to be cuts, otherwise there's going to be another tax increase.
Well, another way to help this situation, obviously, is to have business grow in our state. We know, it's no secret, how business unfriendly Connecticut is.
And that's one of sorry to interrupt you, but you know, I said to the Commerce Committee, to the leaders, all these programs that you have, when's the last time you did a study that said that giving a tax incentive for this particular group actually brings business to our state? Because that should be the intent, you know, and they haven't. And yet, I think they approved like 20 more tax incentive programs just last week, you know, to go to the House. So
are there any pro-business bills you're behind, or what is your stance on that?
Well, certainly I'm against the minimum wage. You know, that's got a lot of thrust up there. You know, it's sort of been my thing. Being a freshman, I'm not so much interested in actually getting things passed as just stopping some of the stuff that's going on up there.
Right.
Well, just to benchmark that for the viewing public that may not be aware, we're at $10.10, which is actually one of the highest in the country right now. And some of your colleagues are proposing creeping up. And in fact, there's some proposals at $15.
Yeah.
And tying future increases to the cost, you know, cost of living, and you look at the pricing indices, and a number of barometers like inflation, which are really a little scary to tie anything tied to labor, which is, you know, again, a very critical piece for business growth. So, again, that's a great question, Dee, and I think in your very short tenure up there, in a few weeks, you've tackled some of the biggest oversight pieces, and I think to our benefit as constituents, that you're looking at things that we can control from a legislative standpoint. So, as we look at some of those pieces, one of the big sticking points is a municipal spending cap. And so what that means, just again, we're kind of talking political terms here, but the state gets to have a voice in how the towns might spend their money. And they look at last year's expenditures, and to you and I, as a taxpayer, I might say, why does the state have any business telling our towns how to spend our money when we've got a few opportunities at the state to fix spending? So we want your take on that, because we know that you've got some opportunities to look at the revenue sharing accounts, and what that means is the state promises to share money with the towns, which never really come true to 100%. And really, it was our money anyway. So you're taking our money, reallocating it, and then saying, oops, I can't give you that promise, which is really not sound fiscal management. So where do you stand on that? Because when we see that, they're talking about changing that again and tweaking it again. We're saying, why have it at all? Where do you stand?
I've proposed to repeal the municipal spending cap,
Yay.
because I think the last group of people that should be telling the towns how to do their thing is the state.
Can I clap? Can I clap? Can I just give a round of applause for this? Because, wow, Craig, that would be amazing for us as business people, as business owners. I have to say thank you. Thank you for being that voice.
Thank you for recognizing that. The state thinks that it still controls the towns. In 1958, the Home Rule Act was passed and allowed the towns to do their own thing, but every once in a while the state crops up its head again. An example is in public safety. We had a bill pushed by DCP, Department of Consumer Protection, to have bingo and charitable things like that funneled down to the towns, to have the towns regulated, which essentially is an unfunded mandate, is what I argued, because then if a town needs to have a board of charity and and bingo or whatever, you're creating more bureaucracy. But they said, we don't want to do the work, we don't have the time, but we're going to set the fees. We're going to tell you this is the most you can charge in each of your towns. So you can't have your hands in both. It's sort of like the same situation. So I said, no, either you're hands off or you're hands on.
But when you can create a state law and your hands in there anyway, let's dig a little deeper in here. One of the exclusions in this law is that you can exclude debt. So we're encouraging towns, potentially, we're encouraging you to take on more debt. If you've got the cash on hand, right? When you look at the spending cap, one of the exclusions is debt. So we would say, continue borrowing more than you have. That's not good. Would you, as a business owner, Chris, would you say, let's put more in credit card? I've got cash sitting in my bank, but I don't want the panel to look at any of this. Let's keep putting more in credit card. We're encouraging rather reckless borrowing patterns. If we say, oh, you know what doesn't count for the spending cap is on credit card, let's not look there. And just to elucidate that, I don't think some of our public understands that when they're talking to you and saying, why did you vote against that, Craig? I don't think they quite understand what's out. I mean, special education costs, we get that. If a hurricane comes in and wipes it out and the town has to spend money on that, that shouldn't count towards spending cap. We get that. Those are extraordinary circumstances, or perhaps funds that have special purpose. But I think all of us would agree as business people, it doesn't make any sense.
No, it totally doesn't make any sense. But a lot of the philosophy that I see is just thinking about today and not thinking about the future. So, if you can get your benefit today, we'll deal with it down the road. And I think that's what's gotten us into a lot of the problem that we're into. And the state just saying that a local issue is somehow a state issue. We have the crumbling foundation thing, which is a $1 billion situation. And the bill that came out of the Public Safety Committee that I voted against was to put a surcharge on every residential insurance policy in the state, presently of $12. There is no cap on it, so forever. And there is no cap on the amount. So in another couple of years, they'll say, well, it's not enough money, so we're going to make it $200. And those are the kinds of programs that just drive people out of this state.
It's true. And are there any other regulations for businesses that you would like to see eliminated?
I did. I testified before the General Law Committee on a bill I proposed to help home improvement contractors who render emergency services, because the way the statute is presently, they have to have a contract, and they have to give the homeowner a 3-day rescission period before that contract is effective. So you have somebody who has a flood in their basement, let's say, and the water is still coming through, and they call the contractor, we have damage. Technically, under the law, the contractor can't start the work until the homeowner has signed and 3 days has passed. Now, if they do the work and then they go back and the homeowner doesn't pay them and they sue them, the law says that the contractor doesn't get paid. That doesn't make sense. No. So I testified before General Law, with regard to that regulation, and hopefully that will get worked out. But those are the kinds of things that I bring to Hartford, because I represent contractors and homeowners in these disputes, and it's just nonsensical. One of the other ones is I've had disputes with various state agencies on behalf of clients, and a lot of times it has to do with a difference in interpretation of a regulation. And I've co-sponsored a bill that would allow, when that happens, the parties to go to the Attorney General's office for a declaratory ruling before any fines are levied. Let's clear up what this really means. We have this coming to the town council situation with Thurston and the noise. The state regulation, which is enforced by DEEP doesn't know what it means. Yeah. This is a perfect situation which would perhaps resolve that if we were able to do that. But presently, the AG's office doesn't render declaratory rulings. So I think that would be very helpful for businesses in Connecticut to have that ability. So there's just some examples with regard to regulation.
If we can kind of hone back in on the minimum wage. I started work when I was 15, and I was on minimum wage. I think it was $1.79 or something like that. And I never aspired to stay there. Okay, I aspired to work up, and I became a line cook and this and that, and then I kind of moved on. But my point was that's where I started, but I didn't want to end there. And you have a lot of people calling for a living wage, which I personally kind of don't understand, because I would think you'd want to keep moving up the food chain. No pun intended. There are others that say, well, certain people have certain skill levels and all of that, where this is where they're kind of stuck, maybe, or something like that. Where do you come down on that? What's your thought?
I think the minimum wage should be repealed. I agree. It's a start. It's not an end. Very few of the people that are proponents of the $15 minimum wage actually work for minimum wage or employ people at minimum wage. I happen to employ people at minimum wage. I can tell you that I've cut down on employment because of the raising of the minimum wage. The perception of what a living wage is subjective, quite frankly. I think it's counterintuitive to our children. When you say to a child, you don't need to get A's and B's in school, you can get C's and D's, because we're going to assure you, the government is going to make sure that no matter what your grades are, no matter how far you go in education, you're going to make a living wage. That is not good for our society. And the other thing is, components. When we go to buy a sandwich at the store, and it's $10 today, and then we have $15 minimum wage, that sandwich is just naturally going to get more expensive. And who does that hurt? That hurts the people that are on the minimum wage. It just, I've been vehemently opposed to minimum wage.
How do you feel about the pay equity situation?
We're talking about women and men making the same amount. I don't. We had a discussion the other day. Well, first of all, I think everybody should be paid for what they produce, no matter what their gender is. Period. Okay, but there's a thing, I think it's sometime in April, where they're recognizing women's businesses. And they wanted me to sign on to it. And I refused. Because I know a lot of women that are successful in business without being recognized that you're a woman in business. You're a business person. You're not any different. And those programs just perpetuate that you are different. So I refused. It just doesn't, I'm against affirmative action. And everybody should be paid what they're worth.
All right.
So.
So, question. Sorry for cutting in if somebody else was going to, but being a freshman, it's kind of a new learning experience and all of that. So, we were chatting a little bit earlier. What would you say your biggest surprise has been so far?
How they take sometimes me for granted. That
Oh, interesting.
I've caused a lot of disturbance up there. I'm not bashful, and I was
We know that.
I was the first freshman to speak on the floor. It was actually in favor of a judge who I thought was getting a bad rap, and a lot of times it's freshmen should be seen and not be heard. And I'm being heard. So that's sometimes difficult because while you might make noise, a lot of freshman bills don't go anywhere. And that's frustrating, because you could have the best ideas, but because you're new, the old boys club doesn't let you, get in. But I fight. And I think that they've learned that, the other day there was 17 things on the commerce agenda. I think I voted no on every one of them, and I explained why I voted no on every one of them. The most common thing I hear up there is, do you ever sleep? Because I read everything, and I have questions and comments about everything, and I'm working hard. They're not used to that.
So you don't say pass it first and then read it?
No.
Is that what I'm hearing?
But I think
We have like 30 seconds left.
thank you for your partnership.
Thank you for having me.
We want to thank you for coming. You're very valuable up there. We appreciate you being
Thank you.
here today. And we want to thank
Great
you
job.
all for joining us
Thank you.
on the Q
You
Show.
got it, man.